our guest. First, I want to welcome everybody. My name is Karen X, and I'm your moderator for this evening. Really excited to see everybody here, expecting that there's going to be a lot more people. So, thank you very, very much for being here with us. I want to remind you that this is being convened by Lincolnwood Together, and that Lincolnwood Together is a community organization in Lincolnwood. We've been in existence for 3 years, and we are dedicated to fostering a Lincolnwood that is informed, engaged, and unified. We are omnipartisan. We don't take a position on anything. We don't endorse candidates. We don't endorse policy. We are really about making sure that information gets out there and that people are engaged in the political process and that we can be unified when we agree and when we disagree. We're not about that. We're not about anything other than informed, engaged, and unified. I would like to request, or we would like to request this evening, a couple of things to make this session go well. We would like to request that everybody remain muted, please, unless you are, called on to share for some reason. We're going to probably do all of our sharing through the chat so that it's easier for everybody. We are recording this session. Our intention is to use the session um, our intention is to use the session on our Facebook page, so you'll be able to see it afterwards. Somebody just wrote to me, somebody who loves me very much wrote to me and said, get rid of the background. It's broadcasting on your forehead. So I am getting rid of the background, and here I am. So we're recording, and it will be posted on the Lincolnwood Together Facebook page. And I want to remind everybody that if you would not like to see yourself on the Facebook page, you can turn off your camera and no one will be able to see you. You also can change your name. If you want to change your name, you can do that. If you would like to remain anonymous, but we do ask that everybody stay muted throughout. It's really important to us at Lincolnwood Together that we all treat each other with the utmost respect at all times. And we want to foster an environment in which we can listen to each other. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, but that we can always treat each other with respect and trust that we can come to our own decisions, each of us our own way. I'm getting a little bit distracted because so many people are coming in. I'm pretty excited. Um, we do have a mechanism, and some people have asked me about this. If somebody were to what they call Zoom bomb us, where someone uninvited or someone who wasn't able to show that kind of respect for everybody in the group, Paula Fuller-Tobin is with us tonight as a co-host, and she's got her finger on the button ready to eject anybody who's not using respectful language and not collaborating with us in the positive sense that we all want to collaborate. So thank you, Paula, for doing that. There are several ways to participate, and I just want to point this out in advance. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat button. If you open up the chat, you can do one of two things. You can write a message to everybody, and it'll say at the bottom, like where it says to, and you put everybody. Everyone else in the chat will be able to see your name and they'll be able to read your question. If you would like to remain anonymous, you can send your question, just change that to just send it to Paula Tobin. She will copy it and paste it to me to address to the moderator. So we will not say your name and you can have your anonymity that way. We found that to be really important to people in our previous experiences, in our previous events. Okay, the last thing is if everybody in this group, I don't know how you found out about tonight's meeting. I'm thrilled to see new people that I haven't seen before, and I would humbly request if you would be so kind to send us your email address. If you go in the chat and you can send it to Paula, we would love to be able to invite you to future events. I promise not to spam you or send you lots of junk, just when we want to invite you to our next event. Last thing I want to comment is if you, at the top right of your screen, in the top right corner, I would recommend that everybody select speaker view. when Michael starts talking. He's got a slide presentation for us, and you're going to want to see his screen, and you're not going to want to see 36 faces all over the screen. You're just going to want to be able to see what he's showing us. So I suggest that you select speaker view, and you can make the pictures of people's faces, you can make them smaller if you want to. Okay, so with that having been said, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Michael Rabbitt is an equity and justice organizer and activist in his community, which is Edgebrook. Our state representative, Denise Stoneback, is our state representative-elect. It recommended that he contact us regarding the Illinois Fair Tax Amendment to the state constitution that will appear on the November ballot. Michael is a member of Vote Yes for the Fair Tax Coalition. Some of you have reached out to me about that, but Michael and I have talked extensively, and he has promised me that his presentation will be fact-based and neutral. And although he has a strong position on the issue, I think everybody has a strong position on the issue, Michael will present the facts. He's prepared to answer questions about this important ballot initiative in the November election. So I want to thank everybody once again for joining, and I'd like to pass the mic over to Michael Rabbitt. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate that introduction. I appreciate everyone's interest in this important subject. Really impressed with your group and the things that you talk about. And as Karen mentioned, I live in Edgebrook. I've lived here for 20 years, so obviously a neighboring neighborhood. Have been involved in a number of different community organizations, done a lot of work around affordable housing, racial justice, and have also taken a great interest in good government, public policy, and with this fair tax being on the ballot, it's super, super important that people be informed. And so as I've learned more about this, I've really made it a goal to share as much as I can with community groups like yours and individuals and neighborhoods, and just get the word out and inform people. And looking forward to sharing my presentation and answering any questions you have. So with that, I will go ahead and do the share screen. Okay, is everybody seeing the presentation? I got a thumbs up, all right. Fair tax for Illinois. So you'll hear it called fair tax, but I'm also using the term graduated tax, which is the official term for what the fair tax is. And throughout the presentation, I'll kind of build on some introductory comments and give you a good idea of what that really means. So fair tax, what is it and how did we get here? So a good place to start. First of all, the thing to know is that it is a proposed amendment to our state constitution. And what this would do is change our state income tax system from a flat tax to a graduated tax. Now again, I will talk more throughout the presentation about the differences between a flat tax and a graduated tax. At this point, the main thing to know is that flat tax, everybody is taxed the same regardless of how much they make, and a graduated tax has different brackets. And again, we'll get into those details more. But the main thing to know to start here is that flat tax is in our Constitution. It's been in our Constitution since 1970, which is when Illinois introduced an income tax to the state for the first time. So if we want to change the system from a flat tax to a graduated tax, that will require a constitutional amendment. You have to have amendments to change the Constitution. And to make those changes, Illinois voters have to agree to it and vote on it through a referendum. So referendum, you may also hear it called a ballot initiative, and that ballot initiative is going to be on our ballot in November. Because in May of 2019, the Illinois General Assembly, our state legislature, they passed legislation that was signed by the governor that created this ballot question. And what's really interesting about this is, you probably have noticed over the years that a lot of times when you have these ballot initiatives or questions, when you go into voting booth, you'll often see it at the very end, right? It's kind of almost like an afterthought. You've gotten through all the other offices, and then you get to this ballot question. Well, what's really kind of exciting about this, and I think it's, recognizing the importance of this is actually going to be first on the ballot. So hopefully that will increase the number of people who will vote on it. So right up there with U.S. President, which is obviously a huge thing that we're going to be voting on, and this is right up there at the top as well. So what's involved? So first of all, one thing you should know is this amendment is only going to change the Constitution to allow for a graduated tax. There's a lot of other things that you may hear about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the rates apply, but at the end of the day, at its core, we are voting on whether to change the Constitution. That is the question that'll be on the ballot. Now, there are also new tax rates that will go into effect in January if the fair tax passes. If it doesn't pass, the rates that we have today, or actually the rate, singular, because it's a 4.95% flat tax, that stays in effect. There's no change if no wins. If yes wins, then these new tax rates go into effect. So these new rates, I've had some people say, well, is what we're voting on to both change the Constitution and institute these new rates? Officially, no. The legislature passed separate legislation that was also passed last year. And those rates that they set, and we'll see a chart later in this presentation, you'll get to see all the detail around those rates. But that's contingent on the graduated income tax being approved. So if the graduated income tax doesn't pass, then those new rates are pretty much, it's a moot point. It really doesn't matter because it can't go into effect unless the graduated tax is allowed by Constitution. So unlike most states in the federal government, Illinois income tax rates are not based on ability to pay. So again, the Illinois Constitution says we have to use a flat rate. So this means that regardless of your income or ability to pay, everybody is taxed at 4.95%. So the result of this is that a family making $25,000 and a family making $25 million, they pay the same rate. Same thing would go if it's 100,000 or a million, or 100,000 and 500,000. It really doesn't matter what you make. It's going to be the same rate. So it doesn't really take into account somebody's ability to pay. So because of this constitutional requirement, we're just locked into this this flat rate. And so our tax system, does not allow us to tax people at higher incomes at higher rates, and people at lower incomes we're not taxing them at lower rates like a lot of other states do. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on the other states in a bit. So here's a chart that I'll give you some time to kind of unpack what's in here. And what I'd first suggest doing is draw your attention to, first of all, this is Illinois' tax system. So this is going to show you the burden that different income levels have to assume based on total taxes. So this is including income taxes, but also local taxes such as sales taxes and property taxes and things like that. It's just designed to show you what the burden is at different ranges. So in terms of ranges, if you look at the bottom there where it says income range, it breaks it up into these different sections. So the first bar there you see lowest 20%. That's for people who are making less than $21,800. And then it kind of just shows you different ranges as you go from left to right. You can see the second 20%, the middle fourth, and then they kind of break it down more into after that. So you get to the far right and you see the top 1%. So the top 1% based on this data is anyone making more than $537,400. So that's what that part means. Then on the left, you see these percentages going from top to bottom, starting at 14% and going down to 0. This is the share of family income. This is your tax share based on what you make. So for instance, for that lowest 20%, their share going towards taxes is 14.4%. if you look at the other end, and there's a reason that they've highlighted the two at the extreme ends in the dark blue with the blue stripe going across, the top 1% at the other end, their burden is 7.4%. So as you can see, it's not the same. There's working people are paying more of their income taxes than the wealthy, and you can see, of course, then the ranges are different as you go across in the middle as well. So part of what the fair tax would do is close this gap a bit. It's not going to address that gap completely, but what it'll do is that at the far end there, that 7.4%, that'll increase. That'll go up to more like around 10%, 10.5%. So the wealthy will pay a little bit more of their fair share, and then at the lower ends, that 14.4% will go down a little bit. Again, it won't equalize things, but it'll take things in the right direction in terms of addressing this disparity on ability to pay. So the majority of states have a graduated tax system, or what many people will call a fair tax system, and this is the majority of states is 32 states to be exact. So around 2/3 of states have the graduated system, including a number of our neighboring states, like Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota. Also, the federal government uses a fair tax or graduated system, and this is probably will help you relate to what we mean by graduated tax, because most folks are fairly familiar with doing their federal tax returns, the fact that there are different brackets, right? So there's actually 7 different brackets in the current government system. So for instance, if you are a single filer and you make $0 to $9,875, for your part of the income that falls in that range, you're paying 10%. The next bracket, federal, goes up to 40,000, and then that's 12%. And then it keeps going up until you get to, if you're single filer, 518,000 and above, you're up to a 37% tax bracket. So as you're going to see when you compare the numbers to Illinois, the Illinois numbers are much lower than these federal government numbers. But the federal government does use a graduated tax system. That's what we're used to, and that's what the fair tax. If you vote yes for fair tax, you would move us to a system that is comparable to the federal government system. So Illinois is one of only 4 states that mandate a flat tax in the state constitution. Now there's actually a total of 9 states that have a flat tax, but only 4 actually have it in their constitution. So Illinois and those other 3, to change it, you have to change the constitution. So it's a little bit of a higher bar for those 4 states versus the other 5 that have a flat tax. So what does this mean for the middle class? 97% of people in Illinois will get a tax cut or pay no more than they do now. And again, I've got another chart where we'll see that in a little bit more detail. And only those making more than $250,000 a year will pay more. So if there are 2 takeaways from this meeting, these are probably the 2 most important things to remember. One of the reasons I think it's important to be having this session tonight is that there's going to be a lot of money poured into this campaign, this issue. You're going to see a lot of 30-second TV ads, but there's nuance to this, and so you're going to hear a lot of things, sound bites that can be deceiving. But at the end of the day, we need to focus on the facts and the data, and these are 2 really crucial data points that I want to emphasize about the fair tax if it goes into effect. So when I mentioned 97%, what does that mean? 97% versus the 3%. So again, another chart here. We'll take our time with this just to make sure you can absorb all the information. Excuse me. So first thing you'll see is that there's 2 different charts. There's one for single filers and there's another for joint filers. The 2 are basically the same, but they diverge a little bit when you get into the income ranges at 250,000 and above. The other thing I want to point out here is kind of a starting point is I mentioned earlier that our current flat tax is 4.95%. So you can see where that is. So for people, 100, if we look at this, the single, we'll focus on the single filers here. You know, in that 100,000 to 250,000 range, that actually is where we are today. So for people who are making less than that, in that $0 to $10,000 range, it's going to be a lower rate, 4.75. In the next bracket, if you will, 4.9, so less again. It doesn't start going up until you get to that 250,000. So as you remember from the last slide, it said you'll only go up, you'll only see an increase if you make 250,000 or more. And then you can see how it goes up a little bit more if you're, you know, between 350 and 750, and then even more if you're 750,000 plus. Now, how do we get to the, where does the 97% and the 3% come in? If you, if we look at that first level again, 0 to 10,000, 27% of people fall into that range. In the next one, 10,000 to 100,000, 59% of people fall into that range. And then the next one, 100,000 to 250, it's 11%. So if you add the 27, 59, 11, you get to 97%. So that's why that prior slide says that 97% of people will pay the same or less. And then, as you can see, it gets 97% means that for 250,000 or below, that means those next three ranges you see there, they total up to 3%. If you add all three of those together, it's only 3% of people in Illinois who will be paying more than what we have today as our tax rate. This gives you an idea of what this is. These again are the rates that would kick in January only if the fair tax passes, because this is essentially the definition of a graduated tax. That the column that says marginal rates, you can see that they vary, right? They're not the same. If this chart were to be converted to what we have today, you would see 4.95% in every single one of those ranges. And that's what the fair tax would change. One other thing I should point out about that last row there is that if you make more than 750,000 as a single filer or $1 million or more as a joint filer, that 7.99% applies to all your income. But if you're in any one of those other brackets, it's marginal. So for instance, if you make 500,000 as a single filer, that 7.85% only applies to the amount of income above 350, and then your those lower rates are going to apply at the different ranges. Again, it's the same way your federal tax works. So that's like if you use TurboTax and you do, you know, a lot of this stuff is behind the scenes, what all these rates are, right? But when you get to the end and kind of push the button and see what your tax is, it'll usually tell you in like the summary section, like what your effective rate is, which is kind of like the weighted balance of all these brackets added together and averaged. So that is that's the detail there in terms of what would go into effect if we shift from a flat rate to a graduated rate system. So again, what this means is, as I said earlier, is that higher income earners would pay a higher rate, while lower and middle income earners would pay a lower rate. You know, so the key takeaway here is that the wealthy would pay their share, and it lifts a burden off the middle and working class families. So what does this translate into in terms of like Illinois' budget? Like how much more money do we get from this, or do we get more money? Yes, we do get more money for it. That's Illinois has a significant revenue problem, and part of that is because of the flat rate, because the millionaires and billionaires are not paying their share. we don't bring in the revenue that we could be bringing in if we had a graduated system. So doing this is estimated to bring in over $3 billion. I think the current estimates are around $3.4 billion. There's some impacts that COVID might have on that. So it kind of remains to be seen what that exact number will be, but it should be at least $3 billion. That's a conservative estimate to use. And the other important thing about this is that not only from a revenue standpoint, but if some of you recall from recent years, a lot of programs got cut, or we weren't able to fully fund the different programs that showing up on the screen here. So these are all the things that we can make sure that we're fully funding and investing in our communities: education, healthcare, jobs, human services, and infrastructure. Now, one other important thing I'll mention here is that what we're voting on, this still does not tell the legislature what we're going to spend on. Now, in the governor's budget for FY21, the $3 million is allocated to certain things, primarily education, healthcare, and human services. However, going forward, that's really up to the legislature and the governor to decide each year as they set the budget. So those of us in the community here, we have an opportunity to have a say in what we invest this additional revenue in. So if you believe in the fair tax and you vote for it, I would say your job is not done. That's great news for Illinois if we feel like we need a more fair system and raise revenue. But then the other thing we need to be doing is talking to our legislators, our state senators, and our state reps, and saying, this is what I care about. This is where I want us to invest in our communities. Our job won't be done after this election. There's more work to be done. So I started at the beginning with what's going on the ballot in the background, but how will we know if it passes? So voting yes is a vote in favor of the fair tax. So some of these ballot referendums can be really confusing when the language is, you're like, if I'm voting yes, what does that really mean? This one's pretty straightforward. A yes vote means that we want to change the Constitution to allow a graduated income tax. A no means keep the system the way it is. Let's just keep the flat tax. Now, if more than 60% of the people who vote on this question vote yes, then it passes. That's a requirement to change the Constitution. But there's another way it could pass, and that's if more than 50% of the people voting in the election vote yes, then it passes. And the reason for that is sometimes you can have different measures of this because not everybody will necessarily vote on this issue. Sometimes people will pass on this and they're only going in, as you know, to vote on certain things. So there's just two different ways that we'll know whether it passes. 60% who vote on the question, or a majority on the overall vote. And that is the presentation. I'm sure there'll be questions, and happy to turn it over to Karen to hear what they are.
Thanks, Michael. First of all, thank you so much for that presentation. And maybe now some of you might want to go off of the, you want to stop sharing, Michael? You want to unshare your screen? Yes. So that people can go back and see you and whoever's speaking. Great. So we do have some questions coming in, and let me give you the first one. Is there a cause for concern that people with means who are paying into the state tax will flee out of Illinois, for example, to Florida?
Okay, so just to make sure I heard the question right, is there a concern that some people might flee the state, leave Illinois, because maybe they fall into that higher bracket?
Means. Yeah,
the people who make more than $250,000 or more might leave, right?
Correct.
So that is a common concern that's raised, but there's no data. There's no correlation between higher income taxes on the wealthy and people leaving their state. It just, the data, the research shows that Raising income taxes on the wealthy does not cause them to leave the state. That's not to say that some won't, but overall, in general, the data shows that's not a direct statistical correlation.
Thank you. Remember, for everybody, if you have a question for Michael, you can send it anonymously by directing it directly to Paula Fuller, and then she'll send it to me without your name. Or if you don't mind everybody seeing your name, you can write it in the chat and we will ask the question for you. We received an email before tonight with a question: what impact will the fair tax have on retired seniors with pensions? Will the pensions be taxed?
They will not. So the important thing to know about that is today, under Illinois law, pensions are not taxed. So that includes any retirement income. It includes 401ks, pensions, IRAs, Social Security. Illinois is one of only 12 states that do not tax retirement income. So this is only applying to regular income, if you will. Now, there are, I've heard, people who oppose this are saying that that this will happen, but that's not what this law is about. This is, like I said, this is only about changing the Constitution to allow for a graduated tax, and then if it passes, those new rates applying. This has nothing to do with taxing pensions. But I've heard that rhetoric out there. I think, people sometimes hear that and they get, and rightfully get concerned, but that is not happening. That is not what this law does.
Thank you. Be sure everybody write your questions. If you have questions or comments, be sure to send them. We're gonna go another half hour. So you gotta, I think, right, we said, I think so, something like that. Here's a question: who is opposing this and what are their arguments?
So the opposition is mostly being funded by a lot of, as you might expect, millionaires and billionaires and big business. Some of the groups that tend to fund these types of things, like Koch brothers and those type of organizations. I think in Illinois there's a group called the Illinois Policy Institute or something like that is kind of leading the charge on the opposition. Two of the arguments that they are making has already, well, at least one of them has already come up. I think they've used the one about people leaving the state. Like I said, sometimes they raise the retirement income, that this will lead the legislature to tax retirement income, but that's not true at all. They will all, the big one you're going to hear, one of the big ones you're going to hear is how it affects business, especially small business in Illinois. And here's what's really important to know about that, is that very few businesses in Illinois are subject to corporate tax rate. They are, most small businesses actually pay the individual rate. So when you think of how small businesses are going to be affected, think back to that chart I showed you earlier, where 97% or less get, or 97%, get a tax reduction or pay the same. So that's what we're talking about small businesses as well. Small businesses, very few are going to be affected in an adverse way. However, that is one of the big arguments the opposition is using, because maybe even if a certain percentage of them do, they're kind of extrapolating that out to say, oh, all small businesses are going to be harmed, which is not the case. Also, research has shown that businesses typically, they thrive based on demand for their products, not tax policy. Another, and again, I think it's a great question. I think we should hear what the arguments are. Another one is that you sometimes hear is, well, why aren't we addressing the pension crisis, right? And there's no doubting that we've got a major pension problem in Illinois. And some people have said, well, why don't we have a referendum on that tied to this? And the fact is, they're two different issues, right? We just need to attack this one. The state still has to address the pension crisis, but this is a singular issue focused on how we tax incomes and if we change from a flat rate to a graduated rate.
Thank you, Michael. There was another question. Do you know when the last state changed from a flat tax to a progressive tax, and what was the impact of that change?
I'm not sure of the last state to make that change. Like I said, there's 9 states that currently are flat. There's 32 that are graduated. I'm not sure who's number 32 to make that change. I will say for the other part of that question, like what the effect was, there's an organization called the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability that's done a lot of research on this topic, and some of the charts that I have are based on their work. They have looked at other states that have this graduated income rate system, and they have not had adverse impact to their economy by having a graduated tax system. The other thing, and this reminds me of another argument that you'll hear that people who oppose this will use, is that this will just be the start of it, that there will be the legislature will go crazy on raising income tax rates. Now they could raise rates whether it's flat or not, right? They could raise rates right now on the flat tax. So the fact that we're making this change does not necessarily mean that there's going to be other increases beyond what I published on that chart. Now, what research has been done is looked at all these 32 states that do have graduated rates, and when they did make the change, again, I don't know when the last one did make the change, but when they did make that change, they've done studies on, well, what did they do in response to that once they got that system change. And I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think it was like in 70–80% of the cases, they actually lowered tax rates, kind of like what Illinois is doing here on the vast majority of people. There were maybe like 5 to 6% where they raised rates. There was another small percent where they didn't change it at all. So a lot of the concerns that are being raised about how this is just going to lead to a number of tax increases, other graduated income states have not that's not been borne out by how they've used this opportunity to change their rates.
Thank you. I think I don't know if this question if it's really fair to ask you if you can answer this, but the question is, why is the tax rate for those making less than $10,000 so high with the fair tax? Why isn't it graduated by a greater amount so that the lowest income people are taxed much less than now? Can you answer that question?
Well, I don't, I don't know what was in the legislators' heads when they did that. I think part of it is that everybody has to pay something. I think it would be really hard to have the revenue that we need to pay for the services that are most important to the state if we lowered too much. At those lower levels, we need to be getting some revenue even in that first bracket. So again, kind of a hard one to answer, but it's.
I'm sure there was plenty of debate. I don't expect you to know all
yeah,
that. Let's go on to the next question. Is the opposition, or I'm not sure what they mean by this, but does support for this break down on party lines as far as you can see? Is there a bipartisan effort? Is it breaking down on party lines?
I think for the most part, from what I've seen, it's breaking down on partisan lines. That's not to say there aren't exceptions. I had not seen like any legislators polled on, whether they're for or against. I mean, you could pretty much go by what the vote was in 2019, probably to see what the individual legislators think. I mean, if they voted for it to put it on the ballot in November, or when they voted in May of 2019, then they're probably for it. If they voted against it, then they're probably against it.
This next question throws back to what you were talking about a moment ago. Can the legislators change these rates at a later time and increase the rates?
Yes, they can.
And that's true whether we get the flat rate or the progressive rate. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be, if it's a flat rate today, they can change the rate with a flat rate. They increase it from 4.95 to 5.95. They can take it down from 4.95 to 3.95. I mean, it was 3%, some of you may recall it was 3%. I know when I first moved here, I think it was a flat 3%. It's since gone up to 4.95. So they can change it now, and they can change it even after January if this graduated system is in place.
Thank you. The next question, and keep the questions coming, ladies and gentlemen. These are great questions. Can the $3 billion be used to pay off the state pension debt and other debts?
It can be used to pay our bills and other debts. There might be some of it being allocated to the pension debt, but that's really not the main purpose. Its main purpose is for what they call the general fund, which is to pay for the main social services and education and things like that.
Thank you. The next one says, "Hi, Michael. Thank you for coming today. I didn't understand the first graph you showed, which showed percent income by share for different income brackets. I don't understand why the shares were different if everyone pays the same rate right now. Can you please explain the concept of shares more? Is this intended to reflect something like disposable income after taxes, which I would expect to be a larger disparity between the different income brackets?"
Yeah, that's a great question. It resonates with me because the very first time I saw that chart, I had the same reaction because I didn't know that it was based on, that it included things like local taxes like property taxes and sales taxes. So it would be the same if it was just the income tax, but the idea there, the takeaway from the slide is to show what is that total burden on people at different income ranges. So when you include things like property taxes, which are regressive, sales taxes, which are regressive, when it's regressive, it's the stuff on the left, those ranges on the left are going to be a little higher. And that's why I was saying that when I said that if the fair tax went into effect, it wouldn't level it completely. It would cause that extreme at the left to go down a little bit, and it would cause the burden on the wealthy to go up a little bit. So that's why why that slide looks the way it does.
I was confused too. Thank you for asking that question. I don't know if this is meant to be a rhetorical question, but it's here, so I'll read it. Do people who earn $10,000 a year really pay taxes?
I think that is rhetorical.
Okay.
I mean, if they file their taxes, then that we saw what the rates are, or we know that there's a rate for that, and so I don't know what more to say on that one.
Yeah, I think it's hard to imagine. Okay, the next question: Does the tax legislation passed that sets the top rate at over $250,000 a year take into consideration future inflation, creating a fear of inflation creep over the years? How does the proposed tax rate compare to our neighbor states?
Okay, so I think there were two questions.
I think there's two questions in there. Yeah, I'm sorry, it wasn't clear.
That's all right. The first one is, does it take into account inflation?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it does. I mean, because that's the rate is the rate. Now the legislature can decide, whenever, 5 years from now, if they think that they need to adjust the rates to account for inflation, they can. But that would be the answer to the first question. The second one, remind me what that was.
The second was, how does the proposed tax rate compare to our neighboring states? You said some of our neighbors. Yeah. Can you be more specific?
I do know, I don't have those readily available, but I do know that Minnesota definitely has a higher tax rates than we do. In fact, their governor, when Dayton was in office, he actually came in and raised rates, and yet their economy responded in a very positive way. They created new jobs, and it was kind of in contrast to Kansas. A lot of people like to compare Minnesota and Kansas because in Kansas, the governor did the opposite. He cut rates, and they had a lot of problems, including education funding, and so we actually, so I know for sure we're lower than Minnesota. I think Wisconsin as well, but that's a good question. You can always look that up and share it later.
Yes, thank you. Someone asked, oops, wait a minute, jumped. Um, where is the tax rate chart for the graduated tax that is proposed, posted online so I can share it with others?
I can get that information to you. One thing that I would encourage people to look for, or I can share this with you as well, is there's an actual site that is a fair tax income, first tax calculator. So you can actually enter in your income and see how the fair tax affects you. And there's another site that's really cool. It does it by county too. You can by different counties in Illinois. You can see what the effect would be. So we'll definitely try to get that information to you.
This seems like a really good time to ask everybody who's on the call, if you did not receive an email from Lincoln Wood Together telling you about tonight's event, would you please put your email address in the chat? You can send it directly to me or directly to Paula. We won't share it with anybody else. But if Michael makes those links available, I would love to follow up with tonight's call and send you that information. So please be sure, and also to invite you to future ones, but please be sure. Great, I see email address coming in, perfect. Please keep them coming, keep them coming. All right, another question. It seems like our state never has enough money. How far will this change go toward filling our budget shortfall? I realize things are still changing with COVID and the current answer may not be now knowable. But prior to the pandemic, how much would this change go toward meeting our debts and budget shortfalls from the years we didn't have a balanced budget? I hope I
Right.
said.
So we have a structural deficit in Illinois. So year after year, we do not have enough revenue to cover what we need to spend on to have essential services for people in the state. We'll raise an extra $3 billion, but it's not going to be enough right away to close that deficit gap. But over time, it will contribute towards closing that gap. How many years it takes, I don't know. A lot of it just depends on the economy and forecasts and things of that nature. But it puts us on a path towards fixing and addressing that structural deficit. Now, some people will say that, well, this is all because we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Actually, if you go back to, I think it's I'm trying to think the stat, it was like the year 2000, go back to from 2000 to now, our spending is actually accounting for inflation like 23% less than what it was then. So, I think there's this sort of myth that, the state legislatures spend like drunken sailors or whatever, but they're actually spending on the services that we need to educate our children. There's another issue with the property tax that we really didn't talk about, where Illinois, the state, does not fund education at the same level that most other states do. And so what that means is that they have to push that funding for education more to property taxes, to local folks like us have to make up for the fact that the state isn't funding education at the levels that other states do. And so that's another hope that in the long term, this increased revenue not only closes the structural deficit, but allows us to relieve some of the pressure on property taxes because the state's got more revenue coming in that they can apply to education.
Interesting, thank you for that. I think you sort of approximated this question, but I want to include what everybody says. So how do we know that the money will be used wisely?
Well, that goes to what I was saying earlier, is that, the work is not done after this is voted on in November. If it passes, you have to hold your legislators accountable to make sure it's spent wisely. And like I said, you need to let them know what is important to you. There's a lot of different ways it can be spent, and there's a lot of needs. And so it's important for you to let your legislators know how you want that money to be spent. There's no guarantees, that we need to be really open about that. This constitutional amendment does not say how this money is going to be spent. It basically says we're going to change from a flat rate to a graduated, and we've got some new rates. But it does not, this legislation does not say how this money will be spent. We have to tell our legislatures how we want it to be spent.
Excellent. And that's why we need groups like Lincolnwood together, right? So that we're engaged and informed. Okay, moving right along. One person shares with us that someone making under $12,200 a year does not have to file federal income tax. I think that question had come up earlier.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm not sure that this comment, okay, for Michael, off the top of your head, what are the chances that the fair tax will pass? What's your prediction right now?
There's some early polling, I think, that's showing that like 55% to 65% of people are in favor of it. So based on that data, it's got a decent chance of passing, but I really think it's too early. Some people think that, you know, the opposition is going to be well funded and they'll have a bunch of commercials and that'll sway things. Of course, Governor Pritzker is putting a lot of his own money into this in favor of it. So I don't know who's going to spend more money. A lot of money is going to get spent either way, but we all know that unfortunately a lot of people will decide based on commercials they see versus people, engaged citizens like yourselves who are here, you know, getting the information and trying to process it and think it through. So things can change, and polls aren't always reliable, but there are some, you know, early polls that show that it's sort of in the range of where it could pass.
Yeah, and it's really, I think it's incumbent upon us who are informed to talk to people about anything that we care about and make sure, you know, that people get the information. The next question is, was there a reason why the flat tax wasn't incrementally increased over the years?
Well, it has gone up. It has been increased. I don't know how incremental. I can't remember exactly how many changes it's gone through. I know there was a one of the, I think the first increase maybe above the 3% was like a temporary one. I think it was like, you know, in effect for 3 years or something like that. And then there was a matter of the legislature just agreeing to make it permanent. So I don't remember if there was like any incremental even in between the three. There might have been one in between the 3 and the 4.95, but you know, I don't know why, you know, why they chose not to make other changes.
And then the last question that here comes more. This question was, how does Illinois tax compare to other states?
How does Illinois, the state income tax compare?
I assume it just says, how does Illinois tax? So I'm assuming they're talking about the Illinois income tax and how it compares to other states. Are we among the highest, the lowest, the medium?
Well, I mean, it's all over the board. I mean, it'd be best to just try to find a chart that shows what the rates are for all states. Again, you gotta first of all take into account, like what I said earlier, that some states have no income tax. There's 9 that have no income tax. There's 9 that have a flat rate like us, and then there's the 32 that have graduated. Again, like I said, Minnesota has higher rates than us. I'm pretty sure Wisconsin does, but I don't have off the top of my head what, you know, how we compare to so many other different states, other than like at a high level, what type of systems they have.
Great. More questions, anybody? While you think of your questions, because we still have plenty of time, I want to remind everybody. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I'll just add one real quick thing while
Sure.
I thought is in my head. I have seen data that shows that if you take all the taxes into account, like property taxes, income taxes, Illinois is considered, I think it's either the 4th or 5th most regressive tax state. In other words, that chart, going back to that one chart, we put much more of a burden on lower income and middle income people than most other states. In other words, we don't tax the wealthy as much as other states do.
Thank you. I wanted to remind everybody while I've got you here that Lincolnwood Together has a project or a subgroup called the Harisse Levitt Memorial Angel Fund. And I just want to be sure everybody is aware of the fund, where we collect money and then distribute it to families in financial crisis in Lincolnwood. So if you hear about that, we'd love to have your support for the Harris Levitt Memorial Angel Fund. And also, you can send us your email address at lincolnwoodtogether@gmail.com. And if you have any suggestions for topics, like we didn't come up with the topic for tonight. We were very fortunate that our state representative-elect suggested and connected us with Michael. And so we got this great topic. If there are topics that you're interested in, let us know and we'll find speakers, and we would love to reconvene and talk about